the same play more than about 3 or 4 times in any one month, and that would be the most popular. And they were doing 6 plays a week, and each day it would be a different play. So they had to do rehearsal all morning, performing all afternoon, and if he wrote his plays, he was doing that in the evenings under candlelight in taverns or wherever it was. He was having his evening meal.
So he was a desperately busy man.
Very busy, yeah.
Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy.
Hamlet in the full text runs 4 hours. Now why would this frantically busy man write a play that is twice as long as it needs to be, knowing it'll be cut?
Where be your jibes now?
He found it incredibly easy to write. I mean, he wrote with, as Johnson said, he wrote with such facility that it was better he had been stopped. He actually enjoyed writing, and he found it very easy to do.
But hold on, writing wasn't easy at all. The pens were crude, the paper was rough, and the light was so bad that you just couldn't go on for long.
And then, of course, light was not good. There was no electricity in those days.
No, he had to write by candlelight.
Yes.
Yeah.
And candles were very expensive.
They were, that's true. Yeah.
Good candles.
That's probably why he sat in a tavern writing, because the taverns or ordinaries always provided an evening meal.
Yes.
They also provided candles as part of what you bought. So that would have been certainly for him. And he was a fairly skinflintish character, Shakespeare, unlike Marlowe.
The only samples of his hand that we have are half a dozen shaky signatures.
It doesn't look like, to me, the hand of a competent writer. Whether that's because he never could write, or because of his age, his sickness, maybe that might have caused this, can't say, but they're all. Yeah.
Of course, people's handwriting then had to be better than it is today, because so much depended on it, didn't it? I mean, this man would have written thousands of pages of script.
And people needed to be able to read it.
Yeah.
Mind you, the handwriting in those days was just as variable as it is now, probably even more so.
So, are there no pages of manuscript from Shakespeare at all?
There are no pages of manuscripts. Nobody's found anything
in his hand. And what about letters? Did he write any letters to people? Did anybody write to him?
There are no letters written by Shakespeare, but there is one letter, somebody writing to him asking for money.
Was he paid for plays? Do we have any records?
There's no records. You know, something like Henslow's diary, for example, gives records of payments, but there's nothing like that for Shakespeare.
It's very fishy.
Yeah.
The matter that we do not appreciate and which confuses people so much is that they don't realize that this is the greatest cover-up job in history, and it was deliberate, and that's why it's taken us so long to discover.
But there's still the problem of Ben Jonson and his praise for Shakespeare, the writer.
Because Ben is the Achilles heel of the anti-Shakespeare case in a way, because
yes, that's true.
He does seem to know Shakespeare.
Yeah, and he certainly would have. He would have known the whole. There's no way that Ben Jonson, you know, if you think about this, wouldn't have known that the actor didn't write Shakespeare.
He had to know that.
He had to know that.
And yet, in his memoirs, he never mentions that, and he talks about Shakespeare as a writer.
And does. Indeed he does. Go on, Chase. Go on out and sit.
Isn't that the thing that saves Shakespeare?
I don't think it saves Shakespeare. Ben Jonson was dependent on the support and the patronage of the Pembroke family. He received quite a bit of money from them. Ben Jonson will not come out and say Shakespeare was a fake. Ben Jonson was on the payroll of the William Herberts. Ben Jonson knew of this fakery. There's no question in my mind that Jonson knew of this fakery. How could he not know of it? They walked in the same circle.
So he was keeping the secret, you think?
He kept the secret.
I mean, the other problem I have is that because it was a very closed society, I mean, the aristocratic Elizabethan society was quite small and quite limited, and everyone knew each other. I can't imagine. I kind of feel that if Marlowe was sending plays back, someone would have known.
His silence was being bought for £50.
Whenever there's silence, people talk. Whenever silence is a premium, people talk.
Well, all we can say to that is that Shakespeare looked so plausible. He was a writer of some sort. And he put his mark on these works. So, in fact, he claimed ownership of them by modifying them or by... I mean, he was perhaps the director of them.
Authorship wasn't, yes, it's true,
So,
authorship wasn't the same.
By directing them, by bringing them to the stage, he in fact claimed them.
Well, that is a big assumption, Michael. That is just an assumption. It's just a theory.
Yes, sure.
It's just a theory with no evidence at all.
Put yourself in his shoes. You're not going
But
to...
you don't have to bring in the idea and put the idea into the minds of a lot of innocent people who would never have thought of it before, that William Shakespeare was really a bit of a writer.
All right, well, just tell me, though, how it worked. Okay, Shakespeare receives in the post from Marlowe or from Walsingham a new play, okay? What does he say?
He presents the play, having received it to his partners as something which is valuable stock.
And they'd say, when are you getting another one? We need another play.
Not necessarily.
Oh, and then they'd say, are we going to publish this one or not? I mean, there would be lots of questions to
But
ask.
there weren't any. They weren't published.
They were later. I mean, if he's the owner of the
Oh,
play.
for goodness sake, how many probables are you going to add?
Actually, my theory is not that radical, because we know from Henslow's diaries that you see here that when he bought plays for the Rose Theatre, he more often paid teams of writers rather than individuals. What is radical about what I'm saying is that I'm seeing Shakespeare, the country bumpkin, uneducated, and then busy theatre professional, as a junior partner to this hidden Christopher Marlowe, who's living in Italy and writing these masterpieces. It sort of works for me. That is, if Christopher Marlowe is not dead in 1593. In May of that year, we find Marlowe with his young patron, Tom Walsingham, at Walsingham's house in Kent. It probably looked like this. Here, Kit should have been safe enough. But Marlowe had another side to his life. He was a member of a secretive group of free thinkers who may have been called the School of Night. It was a group that the church and the Archbishop were determined to crush.
There was a great wave of terrorism and persecution against the free thinkers as Francis Yates was established. And a year before Christopher Marlowe was arrested, Giordano Bruno had been arrested. And he was the man who believed and preached that the universe was infinite. Oh my goodness, you couldn't have that. So they had him in prison and eventually burnt him at the stake 400 years ago, 1600.
Giordano Bruno stands in the rain in Rome 400 years after they burnt him at the stake for his ideas. I go to Scadbury, to where Tom Walsingham's grand house once stood. Here was Marlowe in late May 1593, when a man on a horse came with a warrant from the terrible Star Chamber.
It was a Sunday, it was the 20th of May, and they couldn't take him to the Star Chamber, which was closed on the Sunday, so they took him to the palace.
Marlowe is let out on bail while an investigator builds the case against him. This is Richard Baines, a man who hates Marlowe. I sidetrack to Italy to find Charles Nicholl, who, 400 years after Richard Baines, doesn't like Marlowe either.
Marlowe, there's something always held back, something a little shifty, something a bit opportunist, something a bit dangerous about him. I'm drawn to him, I admire him, but whether I like him is another matter.
But Charles has written a bestseller on Marlowe's death, The Reckoning, and he kindly shares his copy of the Baines report with me.
Essentially, this document is confirming government suspicions rather than creating them.
These are the heresies that Marlowe is supposed to have uttered in public, inciting people against religion.
This is Baines' report.
Yeah, this is Richard Baines's report.
In his own handwriting?
In his own handwriting. And there we have in black and white again that the first beginning of religion was only to keep men in awe. A wonderful synopsis of some of Marlowe's plays, one might think. That Christ was a bastard and his mother dishonest, that all Protestants are hypocritical asses.
The Baines report sounds like a joke, doesn't it? But for such opinions, they could make you wish for death in merry England.
To die, to sleep, perchance to dream.
To dream, yes. To dream, no doubt, of the things that they can do to him in the England of Elizabeth.
Tell me, what is God to you?
This is really an inquisition, is what this is. If the English Inquisition gets him, it's curtains.
What can they do to him?
They can do the most heinous things, as they are now saying. Elizabethans believed if you had grotesque opinions, you should have a grotesque body. So they would rack and torture you. They would use the irons on you. They would break your bones. They would do excruciatingly horrible things. If they decided to hang you, they hung you for a few seconds. You weren't dead, and they disemboweled you alive. They took your belly out and
Has he abandoned you? Is he such a worldly god that he must play at politics and the filth of conspiracy?
Time is running out for Christopher. Richard Baines has finished his report. Marlowe gets together with 3 men in a meeting which must be related to his plight. It's the 30th of May, 1593.
Let's get to that amazing day in Deptford, May the 30th, 1593, late spring, early summer, I suppose. What do you think happened in that place?
Well, we know what happened up to a point.
Yes, we do.
We know that 4 men met there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that these 4 men were Christopher Marlowe, Ingram Fraser or Freezer, Nicholas Skeers, and Robert Pooley or Poley. And we know that these 4 men were in quiet mood to translate the inquest, and that they conversed privately, that they took lunch together, again privately.
They walked in the garden.
That they walked in the garden, that sweet May summer garden, the smells of the blossoms and the flowers, perhaps overcoming the stench of the river and the sewage from the Deptford waterfront. And then at about 6 o'clock in the evening they returned to the same room that they had spent most of the day in, and had supper, and were alone together in that room. And that's where what we know suddenly runs out. There were 4 people eating supper in that room.
Yes.
And there were 3 people who walked out of it alive a couple of hours later.
Give me a rundown on the guys who were with him.
Scoundrels. A trio of swindlers.
Good morning, I'm Robert Poley.
In fact, Poley is a government agent.
And?
Agent?
Ingram Freezer is the servant of Marlowe's patron, Sir Thomas Walsingham.
Gentleman.
And Nicholas Skeers works with Freezer.
The mystery is why Marlowe was meeting up with them. The mystery is what exactly they all had in common that day that kept them talking for 8 hours.
What sort of place was it, this house where they met? We have no idea. But we do know that it was near the Thames. Perhaps that was convenient for some aspects of the plan, if there was a plan.
Absolutely. I mean, the meeting could have been anywhere, unless, of course, you subscribe to the theory that it was conveniently close to the river to ship away a Marlowe who was actually alive and well, and somebody else's body that was thrown into the plague pit.
John Penry was executed the night before, 6 o'clock that evening, about 4 miles away from Deptford. So that the coroner of Marlowe's inquest was also responsible for deciding what happened to a body that was 4 miles away the evening before.
Four actors helped me visualize how it's supposed to have happened. Marlowe is on a bed. The other three have their backs to him. Suddenly, Marlowe is angry, and without warning, he seizes Frieza's dagger and cuts him on the head. Frieza disarms Marlowe
and then stabs him
and,
above the eye.
in self-defense, stabs him above the eye. Everything we know about that day comes from the report of William Danby,
William Danby,
the Queen's coroner.
That is the reckoning. And the said Ingram then and there sitting in the room aforesaid with his back towards the bed, where the said Christopher Morley was then lying.
We run the stabbing again, looking for what seems false in Danby's report. Here are just a few of the puzzles.
Why didn't he use his own dagger? Why two cuts on the top of his head?
Because that sort of blade is not meant for that sort of cut.
It's a stabbing dagger. It's not a Bowie knife. So this leads you to suppose that it might have been self-inflicted by Frieza after the event.
And then stab him
And
above
then
the eye.
the most improbable thing of all.
But why does he kill Marlowe? He's got two other men there that could be holding his arms down. They could disarm this guy. They could take care of him. But instead, they kill him, right? And then it's, how would you go back to Thomas Walsingham, and say, gee, Thomas, Sir Thomas, Lord Thomas, I've just killed your best friend. I've killed a great poet. And in some kind of drunken fight in this house you sent us to protect him. Fritzer would be in all kinds of trouble. And we know for a fact that Fritzer wasn't.
Surely what it presupposes is that the three men there in the room were all in on the plot to save him.
Of course they were. They were all employees of his...
But they weren't. They were with rival factions. So
that's what Nicholl says. But that's very disputed. I mean, Frieza was the gentleman servant of Walsingham, and he was the main player. I mean, it's inconceivable to me that Frieza would have stabbed Marlowe without the consent of Walsingham. I mean, there were 3 against 1. It wasn't as if they couldn't have subdued him.
Well, I'm finding it hard to talk about this except in a sort of defensive and negative way, because I don't accept the premises, really, I mean, I don't accept the probabilities or the possibilities. I mean, the possibilities are there, but, you could argue all sorts of historical ideas from the possibilities. There is no evidence whatsoever that Marlowe wasn't murdered, and there's a lot killed, and there's a lot of evidence that he was killed.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. Wasn't murdered, killed.
With this slip of the tongue saying murder, Charles seems to agree that the coroner's report was a cover-up. But of what? A murder or an escape?
Let's say he thought he was going to be saved, but in fact, powers have decided that it's just in the long run easier, unfortunately, sadly,
Yes,
to
well,
bump
that
him
is
off.
the alternative. I've put it in my book, that a lot of people accuse Walsingham actually of having engineered this.
If it was a murder, it sure was a clumsy way to do it. I mean, do you need 3 accomplices? Do you need an 8-hour meeting with lunch and dinner?
There's a whole world waiting for you.
When a quick, sneaky knife could do the job, if that's what the powers decide?
What is one of the most extraordinary things is that in 1593 there was nothing said at the court. We've got lots of records of court gossip. There was no mention of the death of Marlowe. It was as though, it was tacitly agreed. You don't talk about that.
The best argument for Marlowe escaping is that he always did. I mean, whenever he was in trouble, and that was often, powerful people always came to the rescue. People at the highest level of the court. There's evidence that Elizabeth herself was involved, helping to save the Muse's darling, as they called him. She could not openly intervene. Archbishop Whitgift was far too determined and powerful for that. But she could pardon Ingram Frieza so that the matter never came to trial.
We have pardoned the same Ingram Fritzer. the breach of our peace pertains to us, and grant to him our firm peace. We grant to him our firm peace. Here's the operative phrase. Provided, nevertheless, that the right remain in our court, means chancellery, if anyone should wish to complain to him concerning the death above mentioned, that it must come through our court. She's keeping jurisdiction over this case. This is a lid, the highest lid that can be put on this case, signed by the Queen herself.
Well, now, if he had died, would she still take a personal interest?
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, it'd just be a dead body. He wouldn't care.
There's nothing at stake.
Nothing at stake at all. Yeah, It's good proof that he wasn't dead.
Do you think he got on a ship that very night? He ends up eventually in Italy, presumably. Because
yes, he does. Because that's where the plays are written. And they're imbued with this wonderful sense of life, this Italian sense of life.
If I did find evidence in Italy that he was alive, which would be...
You won't?
I won't? Well, you can't be sure about that.
I'm sure about that. I'm sure about that.
But something may have already been found in Italy by Calvin Hoffman just before he died.
The evidence is in the form of notes which Mr. Hoffman, aged 75, received this year from the will of a journalist friend. These say that a 16th century Paduan, Pietro Basconi, left papers stating that an English writer named Marlowe lived with him as a recluse until dying in 1627, 11 years after Shakespeare's death. The notes add that the writer had to leave England. The papers were passed down the Basconi family and were said to have been shown during the 19th century to a British ambassador to Italy, who is said to have commented that he was afraid to tamper with a matter so dear to the English heart.
I have not been able, unfortunately, to find the Basconi papers, but I have found a letter from Calvin written in 1983. This names others who saw the papers, suggesting that Marlowe lived on. One was Washington Irving, the American writer. These archives in Mantua, northern Italy, must be searched next. Dr. Ferrari, the archivist there, shows me letters of the Gonzagas. They were a noble family who gave haven to intellectuals on the run, like Marlowe. Dr. Ferrari tells me that no one, but no one, has ever come to her in all her years looking for an English poet in exile.
Non, je pense que non. Je travaille ici il y a 22 ans. Je pense que...
There's definitely going to be more stuff turning up. I mean, look at the letters you're finding in Italy. No one's gone and researched those letters. That's amazing.
Isn't it?
Amazing, yeah.
That's got to be done.
It's true that things do turn up. This 400-year-old painting, for instance, which might be Shakespeare, turned up in Canada of all places. It was under a bed in Montreal, wrapped in brown paper. And Marlowe's own portrait. It was found in 1953 in this quadrangle at Cambridge. Broken boards in a pile of rubble. If it had not been raining that day, we would never have known the face of Marlowe. So in Italy and everywhere else, let's keep on looking till William Shakespeare clears his name.
Whoever it is, I am not... It would take a lot to convince me now that it was the Stratford man by himself. Someone has to prove to me how he got the learning and the experience that went with the possible genius he had. You can be born with genius, but you can't be born with book learning and experience. That is just impossible.
And so whoever it is, it wasn't him on his own.
You want the answer, Michael. John wants the answer. Isn't it? You do. It's a detective story.
It's a detective story.
You want to know how it bloody works.
Yeah.
It's a little boy that takes the toy apart.
Well, you've got to get to the truth of it.
I very much enjoyed going back on all this stuff with you. I do think, you know, there is a really good novel in here.
Isn't there?
I mean, that was how it began, wasn't it? With a detective story. And so maybe I should write a novel about it.
I think you should.
Sell the film rights.
What have I said at the end? What have I said at the end? It made me fear that Stratford-upon-Avon is threatened. Such fears are groundless. Stratford-upon-Avon is a delightful dream, celebrating the dainty plays. To disturb it would be a sacrilege, no matter if it is based on the myth. Our culture thrives on myths. It is entirely appropriate that the man we have revered for these 400 years since he burst upon the scene with Venus and Adonis should have been, in essence, a myth.